What's up, YouTube? For today's workout, the program calls for ascending sets of 8 up until 66% for both my squats and my deadlifts. And it was an absolute goddamn bitch building up to both. Granted, 66% isn't a whole lot. It's pretty light, but the fatigue is catching up to me, which is why I'm glad that while 66% isn't a lot, like I've said before, I'm still able to train hard under fatigue. For context, the past 3 weeks I've been reintroducing volume into my training and easing myself back into it after a squat max everyday program where I did basically no volume. All I had were singles 5 days a week for my squat, giving my body a chance to acclimate and adapt to a different stimulus, volume, and not throwing myself into doing arbitrary amounts of it for no good reason other than to just do volume. I have two things I want you to take away from this video. The first being that volume is something you dose yourself with over an expansive time. Sometimes you need more, sometimes you need less. And the second takeaway, learning how to let go of your ego for sustainable and prolonged gains. This last month, I've averaged anywhere between 4 to 7 sets of squats per week. This includes top sets, back off volume, and some ascending sets if we're being liberal here. The majority of those sets being at or below RPE 5 to 6, and yet, despite how much I haven't really been squatting, my squat feels stronger than it's ever felt for a handful of macro cycles now. Point being, while the volume I am doing is extremely minimal, there's a reason why. Being able to understand your own or a client's need for volume before prescribing it gives you a better chance at successfully building off of the volume you're given to perform. I went from having to perform no volume, then to having 4 to 7 sets on average, and now just beginning to acclimate. Next block probably won't look the same. Chances are that I'll be given to perform more volume up until I compete, and that's just the nature of volume. You push when you've just pulled, and you pull once you've pushed enough. This is my last ascending set, by the way, before my top set, and warming up for squats actually felt pretty hard, like I mentioned before. I just didn't feel as mobile, felt a little janky in my hips, but I still really like depth here, and this is honestly a pretty shitty angle to judge depth too. With that being said, if you're a side judge at a powerlifting competition, and if you don't judge squat depth directly from the side, then you can go to hell. But on to more relevant topics, letting go of your ego for better gains. Here's my final set of squats. I have 424 pounds on the bar, roughly 66% of my max, or another way of looking at it, over 200 pounds less than my max for a set of 8. That is obviously really light, and I have the sense that most people would scoff at being prescribed that in their program, but emotional attachment to the weight on the bar produces nothing but angst and poor decision making. Going up in weight when you probably shouldn't, overshooting when you have absolutely no business doing so, and recognizing that is what distinguishes hard, disciplined workers from complete dumbasses in the gym, and no one likes a dumbass in the gym. In truth, the point isn't that you should not be emotional. Human beings are, after all, emotional creatures, and I can certainly be one emotional motherfucker when I lift, but it's learning how to employ objectivity and exercise restraint when you find yourself in situations where you're about to make a decision based purely on the fleeting emotions or feelings of the moment without taking into consideration what the right decisions are for the future and for your training. So please take the red pill and lose the ego. And I know a majority of you guys will probably agree to this, and I'm sure that a majority of that majority is also guilty of being emotionally attached to numbers, and I know that because, I used to, and probably will continue to find myself being guilty of this in the future. No one is impermeable to their vices, but there is something to be said about being aware of yourself and knowing yourself well enough to catch it before it runs amok. But to bring it back to the pragmatics of training with lighter weights, and I want to make clear that lighter is relative, but let's say that we have a lifter who can squat 600 pounds, but they can only squat that weight high as balls. Like their ass is in the stratosphere high, nowhere close to the grass. If that lifter were to change his squat pattern to hit depth, then they shouldn't expect their daily max to be 600 pounds because, surprise, surprise, you can't squat that shit to depth. So, if you're going to implement technique changes that drastically alter how you move, then you need to treat it like an entirely different movement. You are essentially building up a lift from the ground up, and it has to be trained before you can efficiently express strength in that new pattern of movement. Finishing out my deadlifts here, and I've said today was a bit of a harder day, but I'm still making these look easy. It's as if this deadlift variation gives lifters an unfair advantage in competition. But deadlifts, in my experience, is the one lift that doesn't really need to be trained maximally, unlike the other two lifts where you may find yourself being closer to failure, probably touching more in the RP 9s and 9.5s on your top sets, or just generally speaking, performing more volume, performing more sets. You can get a lot out of a little from deadlifting. It simply boils down to when, where, and how you implement those heavy deads into your programming leading up to a meet, leading up to a test day or an expression week, whatever it might be. But that's going to be it for today's video. When I entered this meet prep, I tried not to create any sort of expectation, but honestly, with the way training's been going, I'm very much still looking forward to my October 2nd meet. Not that I wasn't looking forward to it initially or anything, I just and still don't want to get carried away with it. And with that said, I'll see you guys in the next video.